The bell above the diner door gave its familiar chime, a sound that always felt like home to Frank. At 81, the veteran had few constants left in his life, but the Rusty Spoon Diner was one of them. The smell of frying bacon, the hiss of eggs on the griddle, and the comforting chatter of regulars had been his morning ritual for nearly 2 decades. His cane clicked softly on the black and white tiles as he made his way to his usual booth by the window. Frank was wiry and bent with age, but his eyes still held the sharpness of a man who had seen battlefields most could never imagine. A faded military patch was sewn onto his old jacket, and the waitresses, all of whom adored him, treated him like family. "Morning, Frank," said Sally, the head waitress, pouring him coffee without asking. "The usual," he smiled warmly. "You know me too well, sweetheart. Scrambled, rye toast, and keep that coffee coming." But today wasn't quite the same. The atmosphere carried a different tension. At the counter, hunched over a plate of greasy eggs, sat a man who didn't fit the cozy scene. He was big, his shoulders stretching the seams of his leather jacket. Tattoos slithered up his thick neck, disappearing into a buzzed hairline. He was muttering into his phone, voice sharp and angry. Customers shifted uneasily, trying not to stare. Frank lowered himself into his booth and unfolded his newspaper, ignoring the man. But the thug noticed him. His narrowed eyes flicked toward Frank, scanning his cane, his thin frame, the old jacket. He smirked, muttered something into the phone, and hung up. Then he stood. "You're in my booth," the thug growled, standing over Frank like a looming shadow. The diner grew quiet. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Sally stopped pouring coffee, her hands trembling. Frank glanced up, calm but unyielding. "Been sitting here every morning for 20 years, son," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once commanded soldiers. "Find another spot." A low laugh escaped the thug, ugly and humorless. "You don't tell me what to do, old man. I said move." Frank set down his paper carefully, folded his hands on the table, and met the man's stare. His lips twitched into a faint smile, though his heart beat faster in his chest. "Not moving. You'll have to deal with it." For a second, silence held. The room braced itself. Then the thug's hand shot out. His palm connected with Frank's cheek in a vicious slap that cracked through the diner. The veteran's glasses flew off, skittering across the floor. Frank's cane tipped, clattering against the window as he slumped sideways, the sting burning across his weathered face. Gasps echoed. A child at the counter whimpered. Sally dropped a pot of coffee, the glass shattering across the floor with a crash. The thug leaned down close, his breath hot and foul. "You should have stayed in your grave, old man," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. And the diner froze in horrified silence. The silence after the slap was thick, as if the whole diner was holding its breath. Frank steadied himself against the booth, his wrinkled hand trembling slightly as he touched his cheek. The sting was sharp, but the insult burned deeper. Around him, no one dared to move, fear kept them rooted in place. And then the bell above the door jingled again. The sound was small, but it cut through the tension like a blade. The thug straightened, ready to snarl at whoever dared to walk in, but his smirk faltered almost instantly. Through the doorway came a man broad as a bear, a leather vest stretched across his chest. His beard was thick, streaked with gray, and his steel-gray eyes carried the same unmistakable glint as Frank's. This was Jack, Frank's only son, a man who had traded military service for the road and the brotherhood of the Hells Angels. Behind him, the air seemed to grow heavier as half a dozen more bikers filed in, their vests stitched with red and white patches that marked them as men who lived by loyalty and reputation. The diner suddenly felt smaller. Their boots thudded against the floor, and the smell of leather and gasoline followed them in. Customers whispered nervously, some ducking their heads, others pulling out phones but too afraid to raise them. Jack stopped in the middle of the diner, his eyes immediately locking on his father. The sight of Frank's reddened cheek, the glasses lying broken on the floor, and the way he held his side sent a surge of fury through him. His jaw clenched, and the muscles in his arms tensed as if barely holding back a storm. Slowly, his gaze shifted to the thug. "You put your hands on my father." Jack's voice was calm, but it carried a dangerous weight that silenced even the clink of silverware. The thug straightened his shoulders, trying to mask the flicker of fear in his eyes. He glanced at the men behind Jack, every one of them staring at him with cold, unblinking expressions. Still, pride made him speak. "What? This old man's yours." He should have kept his mouth shut. Jack's lips curled into something between a sneer and a grin, but his eyes never softened. He took one step forward, and the thug unconsciously took one back. The Hell's Angels began to spread out, their presence blocking every path to the door. One leaned against the counter, another stood near the windows, their tattoos visible, their rings glinting under the fluorescent lights. The diners watched, wide-eyed, realizing the thug was cornered. Jack lowered his voice, making the thug lean closer to hear. That man you just struck fought for this country when it was tearing itself apart. He bled for people like you. And you, Jack jabbed a finger at the thug's chest, don't get to touch him. Ever. The thug swallowed, trying to keep his posture tall, but his bravado cracked under the weight of the stairs pinning him in place. His hands twitched nervously at his sides, as though torn between fighting and fleeing. The waitress, her voice barely above a whisper, leaned toward a customer. Oh my God, this is about to get bad. And for the first time, the thug realized he had walked into a storm far bigger than himself. The diner seemed to shrink around them. The thug's breathing grew shallow, his chest rising and falling too fast. Jack towered over him, broad shoulders casting a shadow that swallowed the man's arrogance whole. The rest of the angels stood like silent statues, but their presence was louder than any words. They were the walls of a cage, and the thug was the trapped animal inside. Jack moved suddenly, his fist shot forward, slamming into the thug's gut with the force of a sledgehammer. The air exploded out of the man's lungs as he folded in half, collapsing to his knees on the sticky linoleum. He gagged, one hand clutched to his stomach, his eyes wide and glassy with pain. The diners gasped, but no one looked away. Jack crouched beside him, one massive hand gripping the thug's collar and yanking him close until their faces were inches apart. His voice was low, sharp, every word slicing like a blade. You think you're tough because you slap an old man. That's not strength. That's weakness. That man you laid your hands on, he's my father. A veteran, a soldier who bled for people like you who never gave this country a damn thing. You'll show him respect, or you'll learn what happens when you don't. The thug whimpered, trying to look away, but Jack's grip kept him frozen in place. One of the bikers leaned forward, tattoos coiling up his forearm like snakes, and chuckled darkly. Go ahead, tough guy. Slap me, see what happens. His grin was all teeth and menace, and the thug flinched. For a moment, the only sound in the diner was the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the thug's ragged breathing. Fear had fully replaced his earlier bravado, sweat dripping down his temple as he realized there was no way out. Jack released him suddenly, shoving him back so hard his head nearly smacked the booth. The thug crumpled on the floor, scrambling backward on his hands and feet, eyes darting to the exit. Get out, Jack barked, his voice cracking like thunder. The thug scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over a chair in his desperation to escape. He bolted for the door, shoving it open so hard the bell above clanged wildly, and vanished into the parking lot. The sound of his car screeching away a moment later was almost drowned out by the silence that followed. The angels didn't move at first. They stood watchful, making sure he didn't dare come back. Only when the rumble of his engine faded into nothing did Jack finally turn back to his father. Dad, he said softly, reaching out. He helped Frank rise from the booth with a tenderness that contrasted the fury he had just unleashed. Frank winced slightly but managed to stand tall, his hand steady on his cane. Didn't think you'd be coming by today, son, Frank said, his voice steady despite the redness blooming on his cheek. Jack's expression softened. He placed a firm hand on his father's shoulder. You raised me never to let anyone disrespect you. And I never will. For a heartbeat, the diner was quiet. Then, as if on cue, the patrons began to clap. First a single pair of hands, then another, until the whole diner erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped tears from their eyes. It wasn't just for the showdown they had witnessed, it was for Frank. For the veteran who had quietly carried his history, and for the son who refused to let it be dishonored. Frank's eyes grew misty, though he tried to hide it behind a small, wry smile. Surrounded by strangers and his son's brothers, he realized something important. He might have aged, his body might have grown frail, but he was never truly alone. Not while his son and the angel stood with him.